In the book of Nehemiah, we see some of the biggest themes of the Bible coming through. We see that God's people always fail God's standards. And we can all raise our hands and say, yep, count me in on that. We always seem to fail God's standards, but what we see through that is we still see God's grace, God's unconditional grace. We see the heart of God coming through to still work through us and use us and save us even in our inability to properly follow God's ways and God's standards. We see this distinction in the scriptures, especially in the story of Nehemiah, that the blessings we receive, being in the promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and all the things built upon the salvation that we receive, that those things are contingent upon our willingness to follow and obey and trust God. Those things are contingent. Those blessings depend on our faithfulness to God's promise. But what we see the gift of salvation in the first place. So going all the way back to them being rescued from Egypt. That's a historical event that depicts our spiritual salvation in God. That is by his sheer, unconditional, unmerited grace given to us, and it's a promise forever. Understand that distinction, that if you're a child of God, you're a son or daughter of God, your identity in God can never be taken from you. Jesus said, nothing can pluck them out of my hands. Jesus said it. Nothing can take us out of his hands. We're safe and secure in him forever. We can forfeit the promises and the blessings and the things that build on top of that. We can lose that. And that happens all the time in Scripture. We see Nehemiah is a giant story of that, of all that God's people lost. They were still, look, you're still God's child, even if you're not a great child. You understand what I mean? We still have that identity. We're still saved by God's unconditional grace. Today, let's return to God.
You know what feels really good? Hitting that beautiful like button. It's just sitting right there, all alone with nothing to do. Help it live to its fullest potential. You know what else feels really good? Embracing that subscribe button. It's like a puppy begging for attention. Just showing it a little bit of love goes a long way. Like and subscribe.